Taemin walked through the empty halls of the Seoul Memorial Complex, his footsteps echoing against the cold metal walls. The building had once been a place where humans came to learn about their history. Now it was just another warehouse where the past collected dust under alien eyes. He stopped in front of a display case containing old photographs, images of human soldiers, scientists, and leaders from before the Valthek came. The aliens had allowed these displays to remain, but only because they served as reminders of how powerless humans had become. 50 years ago, the Valthek ships had appeared in Earth's sky like dark clouds blocking out the sun. They came without warning and destroyed every military base, every satellite, every weapon humans had built. Then they made their offer: submit and live as servants or die fighting a war they could never win. The world leaders had chosen life. Taemin touched the glass case gently. Inside was a picture of his grandfather in a military uniform. The old man had died angry, cursing the leaders who gave up without a real fight. But Taemin understood. What choice did they have? The aliens could destroy entire cities with weapons that humans could not even understand. The sound of footsteps made him turn around. His daughter Yoonji walked toward him, wearing the blue uniform that marked her as a translator for the Valthek administrators. Her face looked tired, older than her 30 years. "The morning reports are ready," she said in a quiet voice. "Production is up in all sectors. The administrators are pleased." Taemin nodded. His daughter worked directly with their alien rulers, translating human reports into their language. It was considered an honor, but he could see how it wore on her spirit. "Any news from the outer colonies?" he asked. Yoonji shook her head. "Same as always. Order and progress. The Valthek way." They walked together through the memorial halls. Around them, holographic displays showed Earth as it was now. Clean cities where humans worked in organized groups, farms that produced exactly what was needed, schools where children learned approved subjects. Everything was efficient and peaceful. But Taemin remembered when the world was messy and loud and free. In the waste processing center across the city, Hyun-sik was having a very different kind of day. He had been a colonel in the Korean military before the surrender. Now he spent his time sorting through garbage and recycling materials according to Valthek guidelines. It was boring work, but it had one advantage. Sometimes interesting things ended up in the trash. Today, while sorting through debris from a damaged Valthek transport ship, Hyun-sik found something that made his hands shake. Hidden among broken metal parts was a data storage device. The writing on it was not in the Valthek language that humans were taught. It was something else entirely. Hyun-sik had learned several alien languages during his military service. This device contained records from another world, another species that had faced the same choice humans had been given 50 years ago. He waited until his shift ended, then took the device home to his small apartment. Using an old translation program he had hidden away, he began to decode the files. What he read made his blood run cold. The records told the story of the Zilani, a peaceful species that had submitted to Valthek rule 80 years ago. For 50 years, they had lived much like humans did now. They had been fed, housed, and given work. Their children had been educated in Valthek schools. Everything had been ordered and peaceful. Then the sterilization program had begun. The Valthek had introduced chemicals into the Zilani food supply that made them unable to have children. Within 20 years, the species had died out completely. Their worlds were now home to Valthek colonists. Hyun-sik found records of 12 other species. All had followed the same pattern: 50 to 70 years of peaceful submission, then gradual extinction. He calculated the timeline for Earth: 50 years since submission. If the pattern held, humans had perhaps 10 years left before the sterilization began. The next day, Hyun-sik called in sick to work. Instead, he went to the Seoul Memorial Complex. He had known Taemin before the war, when they had both been young men with dreams of serving their country. Now he needed to find his old friend. He found Taemin alone in the archives, cataloging old books that few people were allowed to read anymore. "I need to show you something," Hyun-sik said without greeting. "Something important." Taemin looked around nervously. Private conversations were not forbidden, but they were watched. "What is it?" Hyun-sik handed him a small data pad. "Read this tonight, alone, and think about what it means for your daughter." That evening, Taemin sat in his apartment and read the Zilani records. Each page made him feel sicker. the careful documentation of a species being slowly erased from existence. The cold efficiency of it all. When Yunji came home from her shift, she found her father staring out the window at the city lights. "Are you all right?" she asked. Taemin looked at his daughter. Her whole life had been lived under Valtech rule. She had never known real freedom, but she had also never known real fear. Should he tell her what he had learned? Should he destroy her peace of mind with the truth? "Yunji," he said slowly, "do you ever wonder what happened to the species that lived on Valtech worlds before they arrived?" She sat down next to him. "I assume they were integrated into the Empire like us." "Yes," Taemin said. "Integrated." 3 days later, Hyun-sik returned to the memorial complex. He found Taemin waiting for him in the same archive room. "I read everything," Taemin said. "Twice, and if this is real, if this pattern is true, then our children have no future. Our species has no future." Hyun-sik nodded grimly. "That is what I believe. What do we do? I do not know yet. But doing nothing means accepting extinction." Taemin was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the archives held the preserved history of humanity. Books, films, music, art. All the things that made humans who they were. All the things that would be lost forever if they did nothing. "My grandfather fought in the war," Taemin said finally. "He always said that some things are worth dying for." "Are you ready to risk everything?" Hyun-sik asked. "Are you ready to watch our species fade away quietly?" They shook hands then. Two middle-aged men making a choice that would change everything. They did not know if they could save humanity. They did not even know if they could save themselves. But they knew they had to try. Outside the memorial complex, the city continued its peaceful routine. Workers went to their jobs. Children went to their schools. Everyone followed the rules and lived their quiet lives. None of them knew that the countdown to extinction had already begun. 2 weeks passed before Hyun-sik and Taemin met again. This time they were not alone. Woo-jin sat across from them in the basement of an old apartment building. He was a thin man with careful eyes who worked maintaining the city's power systems. Most people would have seen him as just another quiet worker. But Hyun-sik had known him since before the invasion. "Show him," Hyun-sik said. Woo-jin pulled out a small device and activated a holographic display. Technical diagrams filled the air between them, showing Valtech energy systems and weapon designs. "I have been studying their technology for 15 years, Woo-jin said. "Every time I repair their equipment, I learn something new. I copy their data and save it." Taemin stared at the diagrams. "Is this legal?" "Nothing we are doing is legal," Hyun-sik replied. "But that does not make it wrong." Woo-jin manipulated the display, showing more designs. "The Valtech are advanced, but they are not magic. Their weapons work on principles we can understand. Their ships have weaknesses we can exploit." "You think we can fight them?" Taemin asked. "I think we can hurt them," Woo-jin said. "Whether that is enough, I do not know." Over the next month, their small group grew. Hyun-sik brought in So Young, a medical researcher who had been studying Valtech biology under the pretense of improving human-alien cooperation. She was a quiet woman who spoke little but observed everything. "Their immune systems are different from ours," she explained during one meeting. "They are vulnerable to certain toxins that barely affect humans. I have been developing compounds that could be useful." "Useful how?" Taemin asked. "For making them sick. For making them weak. For making them dead." The bluntness of her words shocked them all. They were talking about killing their rulers, about open rebellion against an empire that controlled hundreds of worlds. Taemin looked around the room at their faces. "Are we really doing this?" "We are already doing it," Hyun-sik said. "The question is how far we are willing to go." Their answer came when they met Nari. She was 25 years old, the daughter of resistance leaders who had been executed 10 years earlier for spreading dangerous ideas. She worked in a recycling center, just like thousands of other young humans. But Nari had a secret. "My parents were not the only ones who refused to give up," she told them. "The resistance never died. It just learned to hide better." She led them through dark tunnels beneath the city to a hidden facility that took their breath away. Machines hummed quietly in the darkness, manufacturing components that looked suspiciously like weapons. Workers moved carefully between assembly lines, building devices from plans that humans were never supposed to possess. "How long has this been happening?" Woo-jin whispered. "Since the day we surrendered," Nari replied. Some people decided that submission was only temporary. They have been preparing for 50 years. An older man approached them. His name was Dong Ho, and he had been a factory supervisor before the invasion. Now he managed this underground production facility. We have been stealing Valtech technology piece by piece, he explained. A component here, a blueprint there. My people have reverse engineered most of their basic systems. How many people know about this? Taemin asked. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Workers in recycling plants that are really weapons factories. Teachers who pass down forbidden knowledge to trusted students. Doctors who study alien weaknesses instead of human diseases. So Young stepped forward. I thought I was the only one. You are not alone, Dong Ho said. None of us are alone. They learned that the hidden network extended far beyond Seoul. Similar facilities operated in dozens of cities around the world. Farmers grew crops that could be turned into explosives. Engineers built machines that could be converted into weapons. Scientists developed technologies that the Valtech had never imagined humans possessing. But it was Yoonji who brought them the news that changed everything. Taemin had been careful not to involve his daughter in their planning. She worked too closely with the Valtech administrators. He could not risk exposing her to danger. Then she came to him one evening with tears in her eyes. I found something in the administrative files, she said, something I was not supposed to see. She showed him a document written in the Valtech administrative language. The translation made his heart stop. Implementation of Population Control Protocol 17 will commence in 6 months, Yoonji read. All human food production facilities will be upgraded with new additive systems. Expected completion of sterilization process within 15 to 20 years. 6 months, not 10 years. 6 months. Taemin called an emergency meeting of their group. When he shared the news, the room fell silent. We are out of time, Hyunsik said finally. The network is not ready, Nari protested. We need more weapons, more people, more coordination. If we wait, there will be no one left to coordinate, So Young said grimly. Wu Jin pulled up his technical diagrams again. We can hurt them. We can disrupt their operations, but we cannot win a conventional war. Then we do not fight a conventional war, said a new voice. They turned to see an elderly man standing in the doorway. His name was Kiwoo, and he had been a general before the surrender. Nari had brought him to the meeting without telling the others. If we cannot win, Kiwoo continued, we make sure they remember the cost of defeating us. He moved to the center of the room, his presence commanding despite his age. The Valtech rule through fear. They show potential enemies how easily they conquered us. They point to Earth and say, and see how peaceful these humans are now. See how well they serve? He gestured to the weapons around them. We change that message. We make Earth a warning instead of an advertisement. We show the galaxy what happens when you try to erase humanity. A suicide mission? Taemin asked. A statement, Kiwoo corrected. We may not save ourselves, but we can save others. How many species might find courage if they see humans refuse to die quietly? The room was quiet for a long time. They all understood what he was proposing. A hopeless fight against impossible odds. A war they could not win, but also a war that might inspire others to fight their own battles. My grandfather would have understood, Taemin said finally. My parents died for less than this, Nari added. One by one they agreed, not because they believed they could win, but because they believed the fight itself mattered. They spent the next week planning Operation Fury, coordinated strikes against Valtech facilities around the world, not to conquer but to destroy, not to capture territory but to send a message. The aliens had taught humanity to be peaceful and obedient. Now they would learn what humans were like when they chose rage over submission. On the night before the operation began, Taemin sat with his daughter in their apartment. I want you to leave the city tomorrow, he told her. Why? Because things are going to get very dangerous very quickly. Yoonji looked at her father with understanding in her eyes. You are part of the resistance? Yes. The attacks that are coming. You helped plan them? Yes, she was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up and walked to a closet. From behind a panel, she pulled out a small bag containing data storage devices. I have been copying Valtech files for 2 years, she said. Military codes, supply routes, facility layouts. Everything I could access. Taemin stared at his daughter with amazement and pride. I was wondering when you were going to ask for my help, she said with a small smile. The next morning, the sun rose on a world that looked the same as it had for 50 years. Humans went to work in their assigned jobs. Children attended their approved schools. Everything appeared peaceful and orderly. But beneath the surface, thousands of people were making final preparations for the day that would change everything. The day humans chose rage. The first explosion came at exactly 6 in the morning local time. Across Earth, hidden weapons activated simultaneously, destroying Veltec communication centers, transport hubs, and administrative buildings. The aliens had ruled humans for 50 years. They had never seen anything like this. Kiwu led the assault on the London Control Center, the primary hub for European operations. His team of 20 fighters moved through the building like shadows, using maintenance passages that Wu Jin had mapped from stolen blueprints. The Veltec guards were unprepared. For 5 decades, they had dealt with humans who were peaceful and obedient. They had protocols for managing worker disputes and minor criminal activity. They had no protocols for armed resistance. Kiwu's team fought with desperate efficiency. When Veltec security forces cornered them on the 3rd floor, half the humans were already dead or wounded. Any rational species would have surrendered. Instead, the survivors charged. The Veltec soldiers watched in confusion as humans with broken bones and bleeding wounds continued fighting. Even when only Kiwu and 2 others remained alive, they kept attacking until the building's main computer core was destroyed. 300 miles away, Hyunsik was learning that dying for a cause felt different than living for one. His target was a military supply depot outside Berlin. The plan had been simple: infiltrate, plant explosives, escape. But Veltec reinforcements had arrived faster than expected, and now his team was trapped. "We can surrender," suggested Minho, one of the younger fighters. "They might let us live if we surrender." Hyunsik looked at the boy. Minho was 19 years old, born after the invasion. He had never known real freedom, but he had volunteered anyway because he believed in the cause. "They will torture us for information about other cells," Hyunsik said. "Then they will execute us anyway. So what do we do?" Hyunsik smiled grimly. "We finish the mission. They had enough explosives to destroy the depot, but someone would have to stay behind to trigger them manually." Hyunsik was the oldest, the most experienced. It should be him. But Minho was already moving toward the detonator. "Tell my parents I finally did something important," the boy said. The explosion could be heard for miles. Across the city, Dongmin was discovering what it meant to be human in the eyes of an alien empire. The Veltec had captured him after his team successfully destroyed a communications array. Now he sat in a detention cell, facing interrogation by Commander Velkanos, the regional administrator. Velkanos was confused. In 50 years of ruling humans, he had never encountered behavior like this. Other species, when faced with coordinated resistance, would negotiate. They would seek compromise. They would try to minimize casualties. Humans seemed determined to maximize them. "You will tell us the locations of your other cells," Velkanos said, in careful Korean. "If you do not, we will execute 10 civilians for every hour you remain silent." Dongmin looked up at the alien commander. Velkanos was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. His species had conquered dozens of worlds using exactly this kind of psychological pressure. "Execute 1,000, Dongmin said calmly. "Execute 10,000. You will get nothing from me." Velkanos stared at him. "Your own people will die because of your stubbornness. My own people are already dying because of your occupation. We have given you peace. We have given you order. We have given you purpose. You have given us slavery." The interrogation continued for hours. Velkanos used every technique that had worked on other species. Threats, promises, logic, emotion, nothing worked. The human simply stared at him with steady eyes and said nothing useful. Finally, in frustration, Velkanos tried a different approach. "What do you hope to accomplish? You cannot defeat us. Our fleet is 10,000 times larger than anything humans can build. Our weapons can destroy your cities from orbit. You will all die for nothing." Dongmin smiled for the first time since his capture. "You are beginning to understand." In Seoul, Taemin was having his own confrontation with the reality of revolution. The attack on the memorial complex had been symbolic rather than strategic. The building contained no important military targets, just the preserved history of humanity. But that history mattered, and Taemin was determined to protect it. When Vailtech's security forces surrounded the building, he and his small team could have escaped through the underground tunnels. Instead, they stayed. "This is our heritage," Taemin told his fighters as alien soldiers moved through the building. "If we run, they will destroy everything." They fought from room to room, using knowledge of the building's layout to their advantage. When the aliens found them in the archives, surrounded by thousands of books and documents, Taemin made a choice that would be remembered forever. He activated an incendiary device. "If you take this building," he announced over the public address system, "you take only ashes." The Vailtech commander made the logical decision. He ordered his troops to withdraw rather than risk destroying the valuable historical materials they had come to secure. Taemin deactivated the device and smiled. Sometimes the threat of mutual destruction was enough. Halfway around the world, Yujin was teaching the aliens a different lesson about human nature. She had been a high school teacher before volunteering for the Resistance. Her target was a Vailtech data processing center in San Francisco. The mission had gone perfectly until the escape route was compromised. Now she sat in a cell similar to Dongmin's, facing her own interrogation. But Yujin had a different strategy. She told them everything, every location, every name, every plan she knew about. The interrogating officer was pleased. Finally, a reasonable human who understood the futility of resistance, he sent security teams to raid the locations she had provided. They found nothing but empty buildings and explosive traps. Yujin had given them accurate information about facilities that had already been evacuated and rigged to explode. Her cooperation killed 30 Vailtech soldiers and destroyed 2 of their transport vehicles. When they brought her back for more questioning, she smiled pleasantly. "Would you like me to tell you about more locations?" But it was Hyejin who delivered the blow that changed everything. She worked in the orbital defense control room, monitoring the automated systems that protected Earth from space debris. The job required high security clearance because the same systems could theoretically be used to target ships in orbit. The Vailtech had never worried about this. Humans did not have ships worth targeting, and they were too peaceful to attack their rulers. They had underestimated human creativity. Hyejin had spent months carefully modifying the targeting protocols. When the moment came, she turned Earth's own planetary defense grid against the Vailtech fleet. The first salvo destroyed 3 ships. The second damaged 5 more. The third forced the entire fleet to retreat to a higher orbit. For the first time in 50 years, Vailtech ships fled from human weapons. The sight of alien vessels burning in Earth's sky triggered something in the human population that the Vailtech had never seen before. In cities around the world, crowds gathered to watch the battle. They cheered when enemy ships exploded. They sang when human fighters died. Most disturbing of all, they seemed happy. Jaewoo broadcast from a hidden transmitter, his voice reaching humans around the world and alien monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. "We know we cannot win this war," he said calmly. "We know most of us will die in the next few days. We do not care. We have lived as slaves for 50 years, and we choose to die as free beings." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "To every species listening to this broadcast, remember what you see here. The Vailtech will offer you the same choice they offered us. Submit and live as servants or fight and die as free beings. Today, humanity shows you that some choices are not really choices at all." The broadcast ended with images of human fighters charging Vailtech positions despite overwhelming odds. Civilians dancing in the streets while orbital bombardment destroyed their cities. Children singing songs about heroes who would never come home. Commander Velkanos watched the broadcast from his command ship, now safely distant from Earth's defensive grid. Around him, his staff tried to make sense of what they were seeing. "Analysis," he ordered. "The humans appear to be celebrating their own destruction." His intelligence officer reported uncertainly. "That is impossible. No species celebrates extinction. Nevertheless, that appears to be what is happening." Velcano stared at the planet below. In 50 years of conquest, he had never encountered anything like this. Other species fought to win, negotiated to survive, or surrendered to live humans seemed to be fighting to make a point, and that point was being heard across the galaxy. The revolution continued for 6 more days. Human resistance cells struck targets around the world with methodical efficiency. They made no attempts to hold territory or negotiate terms. They simply destroyed everything they could reach and died fighting. By the end, 90% of the resistance fighters were dead. Most human cities lay in ruins. The population had been reduced by half, but the Valthek had lost a third of their fleet and been forced to abandon their plans for gradual sterilization. More importantly, they had lost something much more valuable. They had lost the image of invincibility that made conquest easy. News of the human uprising spread to every world in their empire. 3 months after the uprising, Earth was a tomb. Taemin sat in the ruins of the Seoul Memorial Complex, coughing blood into a cloth that was already stained red. The radiation from the orbital bombardment was killing him slowly, just as it was killing millions of other survivors, but he was still working. Around him, the few remaining archive specialists worked desperately to preserve what they could of human history, not just the official records, but the story of the uprising itself, the names of those who had died, the reasons they had chosen to fight, the message they had tried to send to the stars. "The data caches are ready," Yoonji said, kneeling beside her father. She looked thin and pale, aged beyond her years by radiation and grief. "We have copies hidden in 50 locations throughout the solar system." Taemin nodded weakly. "And the transmissions?" "Broadcasting continuously. The story of what happened here is reaching every corner of the galaxy." Outside the ruined building, the city stretched away in broken pieces, where millions had once lived and worked. Now only scattered groups of survivors picked through the wreckage. The Valthek had been thorough in their retaliation, but they had made a mistake. They had tried to erase the evidence of human defiance, but humans had prepared for that possibility. Wu Jin emerged from the underground levels, carrying another data storage device. He moved carefully, favoring his left leg, which had been broken during the final bombardment. Like all the survivors, he was dying slowly from radiation poisoning. "The Beijing archive is confirmed destroyed," he reported, but the backup systems activated before the strike. The data transferred successfully to the lunar facilities. Taemin smiled despite his pain. Even in defeat, human stubbornness had found a way to preserve their story. In the weeks following the uprising, the survivors had focused on a single goal, making sure the galaxy remembered what had happened on Earth. Hidden transmitters broadcast human testimonies to the stars. Automated systems repeated the story of the resistance across every communication frequency. The message was simple. Humans had chosen to die rather than fade away quietly. So Young appeared in the doorway, moving slowly. She had been working without rest to develop treatments for radiation sickness, but her own condition was worsening daily. "The medical data is complete," she announced. "Everything we learned about Valthek biology, all our research on their weaknesses. It is all recorded and ready for transmission." "Good," Taemin said. "Other species will need that information." "Do you really think others will fight?" Yoonji asked. Before anyone could answer, an alarm chimed softly. Someone was approaching the building. The survivors tensed, reaching for weapons they barely had strength to hold. But the figure that entered was not Valthek. She was tall and elegant, with golden skin and large dark eyes. Her species was unfamiliar, but she wore a translation device that allowed her to speak Korean. "I am Nelthara of the Catherian Confederation," she said. "I have come to learn about what happened here." The humans stared at her. In 3 months, no alien had visited Earth except for Valthek patrols. "Why?" Taemin asked suspiciously. "Because your story has reached our worlds," Nelthara replied. "For 200 years, my people have served the Valthek Empire without question. We believed resistance was impossible." She gestured to the ruins around them. "You have shown us that resistance is possible. It may not be successful, but it is possible." Yoonji stepped forward. "What do your people plan to do with this knowledge?" "I do not know yet, but I can tell you that we are asking questions we have not asked in 2 centuries. Questions about freedom, about dignity, about the price of peace." She pulled out a small device and began recording. "Tell me about the uprising. Tell me why humans chose to fight a war they could not win." For the next several hours, the survivors shared their story. They spoke of the discovery that extinction was coming. They talked about the choice between quiet death and loud defiance. They described the moment when humans decided that some things were more important than survival. Nelthara listened to everything, recording it all. "This will be shared with every world in Catherian space," she promised when they finished. "Your message will not be forgotten." After she left, Taemin felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. Not hope for humanity's survival, That was already lost, but hoped that their sacrifice might mean something. Across the galaxy, the story of the human uprising was indeed spreading. On worlds that had submitted to Veltec rule centuries ago, people began to remember what freedom felt like. The Veltec commanders were growing concerned. Reports reached them of minor incidents on multiple worlds. Work slowdowns, acts of sabotage, graffiti appearing on walls with messages like, "Remember Earth" and "Humans chose rage." Commander Velkanos, now promoted to oversee stability operations throughout the Empire, studied these reports with growing unease. "It is the human contamination," his aide observed. "Their story is spreading like a disease." Velkanos nodded grimly. "A disease of the mind. They have infected other species with the idea that defeat can be victory." On the former human world, the remaining population continued to dwindle. Disease and radiation took more lives every day. But the survivors kept working, kept preserving their story, kept transmitting their message to the stars. Hyun, sick, now bedridden and barely able to speak, managed to record one final message before he died. "We could not save ourselves," he whispered into the recording device, "but perhaps we can save others. Every species that remembers Earth, every world that chooses to fight instead of fade away quietly, makes our sacrifice worthwhile." Kiwoo died the same week, but not before completing a tactical manual for other species contemplating resistance. His final work detailed everything humans had learned about Veltec weaknesses, military strategies that had worked, and mistakes to avoid. The manual spread through underground networks across the galaxy. On distant worlds, beings who had never heard of Earth began to study human tactics. They learned about asymmetric warfare, about the power of symbolic victories, about fighting to inspire others rather than simply to win. Most importantly, they learned that resistance was possible. The Catherian Confederation was the first to act on this knowledge. 6 months after Nelthar's visit to Earth, work stoppages began on their industrial worlds. When Veltec forces tried to restore order, they found something they had never encountered before: organized, coordinated resistance inspired by human example. The Catherians did not charge enemy positions singing war songs like humans had. That was not their nature. Instead, they used their advanced technology and scientific knowledge to wage a different kind of war. They turned their own cities into traps. They used their understanding of Veltec psychology against their rulers. They fought like Catherians, but they fought with human determination. Other species began to follow their example. The Zalarian survivors, descendants of the species whose records Hyunsik had found, began sabotaging operations on their colony worlds. The Nithek, a species known for their pacifism, started refusing orders for the first time in 500 years. Each act of resistance was small. Each rebellion was quickly crushed. But the pattern was spreading faster than the Veltec could contain it. On Earth, the final human survivors gathered in the ruins of the Seoul Memorial Complex for what they knew would be their last meeting. Radiation sickness had claimed most of them. The few dozen who remained were dying, but they had completed their work. Taemin, now barely able to stand, activated the final transmission sequence. Around the solar system, automated systems began broadcasting the complete archive of human civilization and resistance to every corner of the galaxy. "Our species ends here," he said into the recorder, "but our idea lives on. To every being who hears this message, remember that you have a choice. You can submit and fade away quietly, or you can resist and make noise as you die." He coughed, blood spattering the microphone. "We chose noise. We chose rage. We chose to make the galaxy remember us." The transmission ended. 3 days later, Taemin died in his daughter's arms, joining the billions of other humans who had perished for their defiance. But across the galaxy, their noise continued to echo. Species that had been silent for centuries began to find their voices. Worlds that had accepted submission began to question their chains. The Veltec Empire, built on the promise of easy conquest and peaceful rule, suddenly faced a problem they had never encountered. They faced an enemy they could not negotiate with, could not intimidate, and could not understand. They faced the idea that some beings would rather die than live as slaves. They faced the legacy of human rage, and that legacy was spreading like wildfire through the stars. The Veltec had won their war against humanity. But in winning, they had lost something much more valuable. They had lost the fear that made conquest easy. Now, across their empire, other species were learning the most dangerous lesson humanity could teach. Sometimes, defeat is the first step toward victory. 50 years after the last human died on Earth, Commander Velcano stood in the ruins of his empire's capital world and finally understood what humanity had done. The great city of Velthek Prime lay in smoking rubble around him. Fires burned in the distance where the government buildings had once stood. The air smelled of smoke and revolution. For 5 decades he had watched the slow collapse of everything his species had built. It had started with small rebellions on distant worlds, work stoppages, sabotage, refusals to follow orders. Each incident had been easily crushed, but there had always been more. The humans had planted an idea that grew like a cancer through the empire. Some things are worth dying for. Now, as ships from the new Galactic Alliance descended through the smoke-filled sky, Velcanos realized that the war against humanity had never really ended. It had simply moved to other worlds, taken on other faces, spoken in other languages. But the spirit behind it remained the same. Jinnah, the human ambassador, had died on Earth 47 years ago. But her recorded words still echoed through the galaxy. "We are not fighting to win. We are fighting to teach you that some species cannot be broken." The lesson had been learned. On the bridge of the Alliance flagship, Admiral Nelthera of the Catherian Confederation watched the final assault on Velthek Prime with mixed feelings. Her people had been the first to follow humanity's example, and they had paid a terrible price for their rebellion. Half the Catherian worlds had been destroyed before they finally broke free, but they had broken free. "Status report," she commanded. "Velthek, defense forces are surrendering across all sectors," her tactical officer reported. "Resistance has essentially collapsed." Nelthara nodded. The Velthek military had been designed to crush individual rebellions, not to fight a coordinated war against dozens of species working together. When the Empire's subject worlds had finally learned to coordinate their resistance, the end had come quickly. "Any word from the human memorial fleet?" "They are maintaining position at the edge of the system as requested." Nelthera smiled sadly. The memorial fleet consisted of ships from every species that had been inspired by humanity's sacrifice. Each vessel carried a piece of Earth's ruins, preserved as a reminder of what the human species had achieved through their defiance. It had taken 50 years, but the humans had finally won their war. In the ruins below, Velcanos activated his personal communication device for the last time. Around him, his surviving staff waited for orders that would never come. The Velthek Empire was finished. "This is Commander Velcanos recording final Imperial log," he said into the device. "The rebellion on Earth was not defeated 50 years ago. It was merely the beginning of a larger war that we did not understand until it was too late." He looked up at the Alliance ships filling the sky. The humans taught other species that submission is a choice, not an inevitability. They showed the galaxy that it is possible to choose dignity over survival. We believed we had crushed their uprising. Instead, we had created a symbol that would inspire resistance throughout our empire. The communication device crackled with static. Around him, the city continued to burn. "To any Velthek who hear this message, learn from our failure. Some species cannot be conquered because they refuse to stay conquered. Some ideas cannot be killed because they live beyond the death of those who first spoke them." He ended the transmission and looked around at the ruins of what had once been the most powerful city in the galaxy. The humans had kept their promise. They had made sure the galaxy remembered them. Across space, on a dozen different worlds, the news of Velthek Prime's fall was received with celebration. Species that had lived in fear for centuries finally dared to believe that freedom was possible. On New Catheria, the rebuilt capital of the Catherian Confederation, crowds gathered to watch the announcement. Children who had been born free listened as their elders told stories of the days when Velthek ships had ruled their skies. On Zalarian, the few survivors of that ancient genocide finally saw justice for their people's destruction. They had waited 800 years to see the Empire fall. On countless other worlds, beings who had never heard of Earth raised their voices in celebration of an idea that humans had died to preserve. That freedom was worth any price. But it was on a small world at the edge of former Velthek space that the most important ceremony took place. The planet had been uninhabited when the Alliance found it. A simple world with blue oceans and green continents, not unlike the Earth that had been destroyed 50 years earlier. The Alliance had decided to preserve it as a memorial to humanity and to all the species that had died fighting for freedom. They called it New Terra. On the anniversary of the human uprising, representatives from every free world in the galaxy gathered there for the dedication of the Memorial of Defiance. The monument was built from stones taken from the ruins of every world that had been destroyed in the wars of liberation. At its center stood a simple plaque with words taken from the final human transmission. Here stood a species that chose to burn rather than bow. The galaxy remembers. Admiral Nelthara stood before the gathered crowd, preparing to speak the words that would officially dedicate the memorial. Behind her, the memorial fleet held position, carrying the sacred soil of a dead world that had changed the universe. 50 years ago, she began, a species made a choice that seemed like madness. Faced with certain extinction, they chose to fight rather than fade away quietly. They chose to die in a way that would inspire others to live freely. The crowd was silent, listening to every word. The humans could not save themselves, but they saved all of us. They showed us that some defeats are greater than any victory, that some sacrifices echo through the ages, that some fights are worth having even when they cannot be won. She gestured to the memorial behind her. This monument stands not just for humanity, but for every being who has chosen dignity over safety, freedom over comfort, defiance over submission. It reminds us that the most important battles are not fought to conquer territory, but to preserve ideas. In the crowd, beings from 100 different worlds stood together. Kytherians who had learned to fight like scientists, Zolarians who had turned their grief into strength, Nighthawk who had discovered that sometimes pacifists must take up arms, dozens of other species who had found their own ways to resist, each inspired by the human example. The Valthek Empire promised peace through submission, Nelthara continued. The humans offered something different, the promise that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight cannot be won. She paused, looking out at the faces before her. Today, we live in a galaxy where that promise has been kept, where species work together as equals rather than rulers and subjects, where freedom is valued more than order, where diversity is celebrated rather than suppressed. The ceremony concluded with the reading of names, not just human names, but the names of every being who had died fighting for freedom in the wars that followed humanity's example. The list took 6 hours to read completely. As the sun set on New Terra, representatives from the memorial fleet came forward to place soil from Earth around the base of the monument. The dirt was dark and radioactive, still contaminated from the bombardment that had ended human civilization. But mixed with that poisoned earth were seeds from every world in the Alliance. In the years to come, they would grow into a garden that represented the new life that had emerged from humanity's sacrifice. Velkanos had been right about one thing. The human uprising had been a disease of defiance that had spread throughout the galaxy, infecting every species it touched with the dangerous idea that freedom was possible. It was a disease that no empire could cure, no force could stop, no threat could silence. It was the disease of hope. As the memorial ceremony ended and beings from across the galaxy returned to their ships, they carried with them the story of a species that had chosen rage over submission, death over slavery, defiance over despair. The story would be told on 1,000 worlds in 100 languages. Children would grow up learning about the humans who fought a war they could not win in order to teach others that such wars could be fought at all. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the automated transmitters left by the last humans continued their eternal broadcast, sending the story of Earth's defiance to any being capable of receiving it. The message was simple, but it contained the power to change worlds. Some things are worth dying for. Freedom is one of them, and sometimes those who die for freedom achieve a victory that the living cannot imagine. The humans had kept their promise. The galaxy remembered, and as long as beings existed who valued freedom over safety, dignity over comfort, and defiance over submission, humanity's legacy would continue to echo through the stars. The day humans chose rage had become the day the galaxy chose freedom, and that choice would endure forever.